Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 21, Growth, Mindset, and More. All right, Bo, so I'm going to lead in this time. How about that? You suggested it. You always do it, but I don't know why. But I'll take my turn. One of the things we've noticed is that we often veer a little bit outside of music learning theory and talk about things that are more general, and that's one of these topics that we're going to look at today. And you and I have had, of course, many off-air discussions, and today is no different. We want to talk about growth mindset. What are some other terms that fit in that bucket? We've talked about grit, perseverance, growth mindset. There's another couple out there. What are they?
Self-efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
They're all kind of related to each other, though. They're all in this, perceived task difficulty is one that's linked to this, too. So how hard do you think a task is subjectively, not how hard it is objectively for you to do, how you think of yourself. And also linked with all this is like self-worth and self-esteem.
Yep. So psychological factors outside of music, but that could bring you value and also bring some awareness of where you are or where someone else is, so that we cooperate in the in the learning environment with a couple distinctions that we might not otherwise have if we don't talk about it, perhaps. But I really got hooked into Carol Dweck, Dweck, and her idea of growth mindset, and that's why I brought that up first. It's just the one that that opened my world up a little bit there. And I want to bring it right down to the practical for me in my classes, that I always hear parents say, good job to everybody. The 2-year-olds put their eggs away and good job, or, that was great, good job. It's just good job, good job, good job. It's like, well, that's really great. They're really praising the kid. Well, that kid really did something special. When the case of the matter is, the kid's just doing what he's supposed to, and it's not a good job. But if you're always praised for something, that kid's likely to develop a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. Mm-hmm. And I always ask parents, but then it goes out the window in a hurry. Say thank you. Thank you for doing what you're supposed to do, right? It's not like a great job. And
related to this is if you are going to comment on how someone did, you should comment on, don't praise them as an individual. Because what this does is it causes people to think like if someone's audiating something well and you're like, you're such a good audiator, what they think is like, well, some people are good audiators and some people are not, and I'm in the category that's good. It totally leaves out the side of the equation that work and practice and effort matter. And so praising effort increases the likelihood that someone will try harder, which does matter. It's great if your aptitude's high, but if you don't try, your aptitude might as well be zero.
Yeah, and it brings me back to what Molly Gebrian said in her podcast episode.
Yep.
Don't tell people they're talented, right?
Yeah, it's really almost always not useful information. Because if someone's talented, one of two things happen. Often they just think their talent is enough to have them coast, and sometimes that can be true. I was talented enough in high school band class to pretty much never practice, but that did not help me tap my potential as a saxophone player by any means, right? Because I could kind of coast by with the minimum amount of effort. And so it just changes your relationship with effort when you're praised for being talented. It can make you, ironically, not fulfill your potential.
Yeah. Or you stop trying because you don't get that praise, or don't get the praise for working hard on something.
And this is the other messed up thing about the whole fixed versus growth mindset, is that kids with fixed mindsets, they tend to back down from challenges, because if you can't do a challenge and you have a fixed mindset, it's not something you failed at that you could get better at. It's a commentary basically on your skill, and even worse, on your global worth as a human being, which is like another step that this takes. And so, what's amazing about this fixed mindset and growth mindset thing that Carol Dweck's shown and other mindset interventions have shown is that just telling someone about this periodically, saying like, you know what, you got enough skills, you just got to kind of put in some effort, and it's effort that matters. It's not how good you were, it's not the hand you were dealt, it's how you use it. Kids and adults and all kinds of people tend to try harder. When given a short intervention, like just a verbal intervention.
Or when you fail at something, the appropriate thing is to say is not yet. We're still working, so it's just not yet. Are you ready for that? Or
this is where the conversation gets really spicy here, is that failure, like knowing how to frame failure in terms of a growth mindset, and it's okay if it's okay if we fail, and that's going to help us grow our skills. That is true. All that's true. You can vaccinate people against failure, and it will improve their resilience and all that. And Angela Duckworth's work on grit has been shown to do that. However, this is a big however, that is not an excuse to come up with poorly designed curriculums and basically assault students with tasks that they cannot do. And I will stand firm on that, because this is what can happen. Sometimes I actually saw this happening with a soccer coach not that long ago who was drilling their students. But like, just because failure is inevitable doesn't actually mean that these other things that matter, like mastery and incremental learning, aren't very important for students and people developing a healthy sense of self-efficacy. And that's how you develop self-efficacy, is you constantly dominate challenges that ratchet up.
So there's a
bit of a back and forth here.
Even by first grade, even kindergarten, I get really excited when we can't do something. I go, yes, and they look at me kind of funny because they know that it crashed and burned or whatever it was. And I say, this is good news. It's like, we have something to learn. We have something that is very good to put on our plates to eat right now. So, I said, without that, I don't know what I would teach if you didn't tell me what it's something that you can't do. My job is to find that space between what's really easy and what you can't do, and find the space in between. And I said, I
think that's a great thing to say to students and to model.
Yep.
Students in my lessons see me because I'm always figuring out how to play stuff by ear. They show me a song, I try to figure it out, and I show it to them. Once in a while, I get stumped. I have jazz students, and I'm like, oh my God, they just show me this ridiculous solo. And I'll just say to them, like, okay, we can do one of two things. You can watch me listen to this 5 times in a row and figure it out, or I can just do it on my own time. But like, let's see what happens. Let's put Bo on the spot a bit here. And it's a good thing to model. You want to show them what it's like when you're struggling a bit too, because they'll often respond to what you do more than what you say.
I do that all the time. A kid comes up and asks me, to play a song, and I kind of generally know it, but I haven't played it before, and so I just take a hack at it. And I was like, is that the right song? Even though I made a lot of mistakes. Did you hear all the mistakes? But this is the right resting tone, right? And like, yeah, okay. Can you sing the melody for me? You help me. Then turn the table. Will you help me figure out the melody better? Can you sing it?
Yep. Sometimes I do this with students when I'm trying to make the fixed and growth mindset points. Is like, I'll flip my guitar left-handed, so it's not a perfect example of me playing backwards because the strings are upside down. But I'll often, like, when students are learning chords, I'll say, look, this is not easy. Like, look, I'll try to do it the other way. I haven't trained my left hand to play on a fretboard, and look, I can't do it, surprisingly. But look, I've practiced 20 years the other way, and I'm really good at it. I mean, it's just because I've practiced. There's no other. It's the same human being, and that helps solidify the importance of practice and effort.
Yeah, there's a really good TED Talk, we'll put a link there. Her book, Growth Mindset. And I encourage, I think more than anything, is just bring that conversation present to parents and kids themselves. They handle it really well. It's like, we're going to find things that you're not yet able to do, but we're going to work to achieve those.
Totally. And a related part of this conversation, because, the growth mindset is a mindset that says effort will lead to growth. And so the importance of effort is central in that theory. And it's kind of related to this other idea of learned industriousness. You can learn to be more productive, even if you're not naturally like a very organized person or productive person. And for musicians, this means being like a practicer or like a performer or a project finisher, right? And you can learn to be more industrious. And the way you do that is by encouraging the effort. The success is in the trying and not so much the outcome. But I don't think we should entirely throw the outcome out the window, because the outcomes, we talk about 70% on first exposure and the importance of being able to master things. Those still are very much at play. But you want to encourage yourself or your students, you want to encourage the effort that they did or the accomplishments they had, not them as individuals, but even better, just the effort that they're putting towards.
Yep.
Yeah.
What else?
There is a related mindset. It's so beyond growth mindset and not beyond, but it's in the same vicinity, is this mindset of how you deal with stress. And Kelly McGonigle has talked about this. She's a professor, I think, at Stanford, and she's got some great talks on this, and she's got a book called The Upside of Stress, and it was very controversial in my own book club. I have a nonfiction book club, and I was talking to people about this. But the mindset you have towards the effects of stress radically changed the way your body metabolizes stress hormones and what stress hormones are even created to begin with. So everyone agrees chronic and traumatic stress is bad for you. But situations like, say you're a new teacher and you're using MLT for the first time and you're still getting your bearings and you're nervous in front of the class, is that nervousness bad for you physiologically? McGonigle has shown that if you think it's not bad for you and you embrace it and you say, no, I'm just uncomfortable, like this kind of sucks, but this is what I got to go through and I'm willing to do it, I'm willing to grow. The stress hormones do not have a negative impact on your physiology long term, and it actually modulates which stress hormones you even feel. And I think this is so important for students to know and teachers to know, because students in performance situations often think that stress is bad for them physically. So not only do they not like the feeling of it, they now think it's bad for them physically and don't want to experience it. And the same for teachers, because teachers, in a sense, are performing all the time. Their job is very performative. You're in front of people, and you have to know the songs, and you have to. But having a mindset intervention about the role of stress, that short, acute bouts of stress are not actually inherently bad for you. And that is really, depending on who you talk to and what they believe about stress, that can really stir some people up in the way that the growth mindset stuff doesn't. Because people, have been kind of coached into stress being so bad for you that you must avoid it at all costs.
But it's part of being human. You can't avoid stress. There's everything that's stressful. What's going to come out of my mouth right now in this moment, because it's being recorded, it used to be more stressful. But it's still stressful, because how am I going to sound? Am I really an expert in this enough? What is the internal conversation I have about myself? And it's like, well, I've learned to fail. There's a few things, that was just not a good episode for me in terms of how
Sure.
I felt I performed in terms of speaking and thinking and whatever. But it's like, well, I'm not there yet. We've only been doing this a little over a year, right? So there's
for sure.
Allow yourself to fail, allow other children to fail, and go from there. And I try to make it as stress-free as possible, but there's no such thing as stress-free. I just want not to encourage too much cortisol to take over the body, where they're beaten into. And this is what I was doing with my in the last episode when I was teaching tonal patterns to these kids that, hadn't. This is my first year of really hammering tonal patterns into people, and I caused a lot of stress, and therefore they rejected what I was teaching them because they couldn't do it, and so I wasn't adapting any of my instruction to what the kids needed, other than I knew tonal patterns or rhythm patterns were the basis for audiation. So here we go. But I laugh and get my kids to enjoy class. And when it's time to perform, and especially when they're doing one-on-one or answering questions one-on-one, there's a little bit of stress in that. And you can't avoid it. But if they don't get it, it's, they feel bad about themselves. Often kids come to classes that way because that's how it is at school, that they're not being trained into that failure is really a good thing, so that we know what to teach. And I don't mean failure necessarily like, you failed a class or a test, or, like in the moment you would say yourself, oh, I didn't do well.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff in what you said. I mean, and we're kind of, this brought to mind this distinction between self-esteem and self-worth versus self-efficacy. So like you can have low self-efficacy but high self-esteem. So for example, I can know like, oh, I can't play this classical guitar song. I have low self-efficacy regarding this task, but I'm not devaluing myself as a human being or even as a guitarist if I can't do that skill. But what happens a lot of the time is that self-efficacy and self-worth and self-esteem, they all get kind of molded into each other, where like if a student succeeds, it raises their self-esteem, which I would argue is not actually what you want to happen. You want to decouple the link between someone's performance and their global self-esteem, because if your self-esteem as a human being is riding on the fact of how musical you are, I mean, there's just so much that can happen in there that's not, even if it's good.
And that's exactly what parents are worried about, is how the child feels about himself for putting the eggs back in the bag by saying, good job, good job. Okay, now the child feels good about themselves. Where thank you is just, that's what you do. It's kind of expected kind of thing.
This is another area that's kind of contested in psychology. Self-esteem. There's lots of psychologists that they want to puff up self-esteem and say it's central, and then other people, Albert Ellis specifically is someone who's on the other side, who says that you should be very cautious with trying to go after self-esteem in the typical way that people do, where we try to say, no, you're so good at this and you're so good at that, and that makes you valuable. But that's a slippery slope philosophically, because if your worth as a human being comes from the skills you have, what happens if you lose those skills?
Yeah. I forget what psychology class I took when and where, but that it was not possible even to teach self-esteem. You could only give the environment to which a child can feel that or not based on the other things you teach. That you just you provide an environment that lacks these ruthless characters, that are teaching and forcing outcomes and screaming and yelling at kids and making them feel bad about themselves when they don't know something. You take that away, that's as good as you can get to teach self-esteem. You can't, it's just the lack of bad things. To teach self-esteem, there is no, short of a college course where kids can reflect on themselves really deeply and have had enough experiences like that.
Sure.
There's nothing to give the student. There's no class or show them. You just do what we've been saying, is praise the effort, that you value failure because it leads to the next step.
Yep. Related to self-esteem, another really counterintuitive finding is that if you have low self-esteem and you try to affirm to yourself through affirmations or positive self-talk that you have high self-esteem, that you are valuable, it can actually make your self-esteem go down even more. And so affirmations where you say like, oh, I'm valid, I'm confident, I'm so good at this, if you already believe them, they can enhance it. But if you don't believe them, and then you're coached into repeating them, it can actually make you less.
Because the next thing you do after you've done that is to go out and break that rule, or break that stream of consciousness that you have about yourself.
Well, and the way that the mind works, right? It's associative. So if you say, I'm actually valuable and I'm confident as a person, the first thing connected to that thought in your brain is, no, I'm actually not. I'm not confident, and I know that I'm not. And so it's like the pink elephant thing. Like, don't think of a pink elephant. Don't think about not being confident. As soon as you think about confidence, and that's not for everyone, but that's one pushback I have against this, like, optimism training, in a sense that like you want to be optimistic, but if you try to get like too intense about how you do it. That's where
mindfulness training is, an awareness, just right. You can help children to breathe and be in the moment a little bit more, and give them practice in being able to calm their mind and relax. Schools that are using that are seeing really great results in terms of their discipline.
For sure.
Just breathing for 5 minutes or even less. And the more you do it, the more effective it is. If you can do 10 minutes a day, that's a great start. That's 10 minutes a day. It's so much more valuable than it is to, try to correct behaviors. Let's give everybody a chance to just chill and be. So these are a lot of stuff that we know that I just don't see in practice very often. I think it's really valuable to touch on it, at least. We'll keep this episode hopefully short.
Yeah, and I think this just goes to show that like the wider field of psychology is really useful for teaching in general, because like, for example, say you have the growth mindset online in yourself as a musician and as a teacher, but you don't have the upside of stress mindset. Not that stress is not just, neutral, that stress could actually help you perform better. You're kind of missing out on something. And I've seen great results with the mindset intervention with students, just telling students about this, like, what do you think matters, being smarter or trying harder? And trying harder tends to outperform being smarter, like to a factor of 2. So you're better off doubling your effort than increasing your IQ in most circumstances, unless the IQ boost is like obnoxiously large. But even then, you have to try to get stuff done.
Yep, totally. So
I found these conversations interesting, and for me it's a way that I stay interested in teaching, because if for a week or two you're reading a book like Mindset by Carol Dweck, this stuff's going to be going through your mind while you're teaching, and you might even, you don't want to get on a soapbox with your students about it, but you might mention it for a couple minutes. Like, you might just mention, effort and how people view effort.
Yeah, make them aware that you expect effort while they're there. Most of my kids are overwhelmed with so much other stuff at home, and they reject homework, but I still offer them the opportunity to choose for themselves homework rather than, do this. Especially with, I don't do that early childhood, but I consider 7, 8 years old early childhood. But once they've had a year or two of school, there's, it's not as fluffy as it might sound, but you give the kids an opportunity to show their intrinsic motivation, which is really super valuable to know how motivated a child is outside of the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The last thing I want to mention here is, I don't know if a lot of teachers are aware of this thing called Project Follow Through, but it was a big study that took place in the States that over 10 years, and it pitched a bunch of teaching styles against each other, and it analyzed the effectiveness on like students mastering the content of the curriculum and their behavioral and emotional well-being, but specifically their feelings of self-efficacy. And what they found was that direct instruction, or the style of teaching coined by Engelman, his students had higher levels of self-efficacy than modes of teaching that were solely dedicated on improving self-efficacy at the expense of mastery of the curriculum. So like, for me, what this shows is that like well-sequenced curriculum that students are mastering and they're getting in there and learning, and they're just dominating the curriculum. That's what produces self-efficacy. It's not affirming self-efficacy and talking about self-efficacy. It's an actual perceptual change in the student saying like, I know I can learn because like I've been learning my ass off for the last year, so obviously I can learn. It's almost like it's an easy insight, but I wanted to mention that because a lot of people aren't aware of project follow through, which is a shame. But yeah, the power of sequencing things well can really do a lot of that work for you.
Yeah, oftentimes I tell my kids when it's true, gosh, you're doing first grade stuff. You guys are in kindergarten. Or I'll say, wow, I haven't heard anybody do that in a while. That's really...
It's funny, if you watch videos of Engelman teaching, he does the same stuff like that. He's like teaching these kids math, and he's like, holy smokes, you kids already know this. And, he sounds a little cheeky, but he's actually being real. Like, he's teaching
it's only when it's authentic. Otherwise,
like...
kids sniff that out in a second. You've got to be authentic about it and say, you sang that back better than I can sing. I think that's great. That's tremendous. You're going to be better at me than I am. And that'll crack them up, whatever.
But again, the reason I wanted to hammer that point home is that self-efficacy is better developed through the actual conquering of challenges rather than trying to verbally convince yourself. The convincing yourself often is not enough to do it. You need to, and there's these other programs like, Eric, I don't know if you've heard of these like wilderness adventure programs. Yes. Where people like climb. So apparently those have like lasting impacts on people's self-confidence and self-efficacy, because it's like you're not going to forget like traversing a river that you thought might kill you.
These felons that learn to take care of horses, right? Things like that. Yeah. And one of the first things I recall, like that it's in this domain, it was definitely my psychology class 101 at Mansfield University, where I did my undergrad in north central Pennsylvania, is the book Pygmalion in the Classroom, where they told this teacher, these kids are the real tough ones. You're going to have a hard time. They're really kind of stupid or whatever. They didn't say that. And then they gave the other class, and they switched the other class to a same level teacher, and said these kids are the brilliant ones. And when in fact the opposite was true, and the brilliant ones didn't do very well, just based on the teacher's first perception of them. So who do you really think you have in front of you? I'm always looking for the geniuses. I just always dig for genius. Give a lot of opportunities for bridging or something like that, but not very long, but enough for somebody to poke their head out of the hole and say, oh, look at me, I could do it. Sure.
Yeah. You brought up that point is so important, the placebo effect that happens when you tell a teacher that students are gifted. We could potentially be doing this to ourselves when we give kids aptitude tests. You give a kid an aptitude test, they have a high rhythm aptitude, so now you know that, but then you teach it even harder and you teach it better than you would to other students, and that'd be so interesting, Eric, to see a study. Take an MLT teacher, someone else does the aptitude test, and basically, just fibs it. Just say, oh no, this kid actually has high rhythm aptitude and high tonal aptitude. I mean, I'm sure some teachers would eventually be able to tell. Like, I'm pretty convinced that some could over the years.
Well, that's the whole
I do think
point
there could be this placebo.
Aptitude test is that it eliminates having to wait 2 years to know. See, my kids, I know their aptitude without necessarily giving them the aptitude, as long as I've had them for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and I like to think the same about myself, but who knows?
It comes out pretty. If you're always teaching to that extreme level, pushing a kid right up against where they are, it's just You're not pushing because they're right there. They're just right. They're just there sooner than others. All right, or wherever they are, it's fine. They're up against the next precipice. It doesn't matter what that precipice is or where it is. It's just like that's where you want to stay in that realm, and then also going back and and reviewing to solidify stuff. A la Engelman, who we'll never stop talking about again. Oh my gosh, it's transformed me in the way that I'm conscious now about what my teaching is. I did it naturally, and just because I was learning how the kids learn, and that's what Engelman did. So we're really no different, and same with Gordon.
But in an empirical way, not in the we're all just going to do whatever we feel like way. You're actually trying to figure out, when I do this system, they learn.
And I'd done it for 15 years before I started. The last 15. So 30 years, easy. 35 of Gordon. So we're just about. Keep losing track of time.
Yeah, I found Engelman and Gordon pretty much at the same time. So it's always kind of been in my mind. They've been very.
So all of that, take that all into one big whole and meditate on it before you go to sleep at night, and then see how you teach differently the next night. Just do we really know who we're teaching? Do I really know who I am as a teacher?
Another related part to this in terms of mindset, and it's placebo of mindsets. Everyone's into this willpower stuff right now with Roy Baumeister, but there's a lot of newer research that shows people that think their willpower is limited actually have more challenges with executing tasks. So you can kind of brainwash yourself into thinking you have less willpower than you actually do, which is I find very fascinating, because we know willpower runs out, but it's not actually like a muscle that can be trained. It's been pitched like that in the last. There's no muscle in your brain that gets stronger from training willpower. But people that convince themselves that they only have, I can only handle an hour of focus on this task. I mean, you might do well with a break, but I just find this whole thing interesting. You can, your mindset can really distort how you're viewing things
so this,
in quite a large way.
This has come out, this growth mindset and these other things have come out, pretty solidly in the last 20 years, more than usual the last 10, 15 or so. There's people pick up on this in the education arena, and we've got a great school district here outside Baltimore relative to a lot of. Anyway, bottom line is my daughter was in 8th grade and the word of the year was perseverance, and she would come home and just roll her eyes. It's like, Dad, they're doing the opposite. They're making me so damn tired. I added the damn. She didn't say that back then. It's just so tired of I just want to kill myself over the word perseverance. They were teaching about perseverance the whole time. They were doing the work of providing opportunities for children to persevere, and it was this top-down perseverance versus community thing, because it's all about this stuff. It's all about communication between your student and yourself and the people that are managing other teachers, I suppose, in a school.
Yep.
But it's a conversation, and nobody's invalid inside this conversation, because kids feel how they feel, and that's the end of it. They feel that way. So that's not. It's
sure, yeah.
It's not well, you shouldn't feel that way. Stop feeling that way.
Yeah, I mean, this whole growth mindset leading to grit and perseverance. I mean, I love Angela Duckworth's work, which is on grit and perseverance and stuff, but I often do not like how it's interpreted by people. For example, there's a big difference. If you have a teacher who's reading about grit and perseverance, and they're intrinsically motivated to become a more gritty person, that is radically different than telling a student you should persevere, and the student is not interested in it at all. I mean, it's just different. And so tried to top down teach someone about grit or just tell them about it may not have the same effect as someone actually being connected with this idea of becoming grittier.
It's a choice that's made at the individual level, and all we can do is offer the opportunity, right, for these kinds of things. I think ultimately all the education lives over there with the student. It's a willingness to be taught. And it's like the miracle that they let us is pretty cool, right? But they're always in charge. To me, the student's always in charge in terms of them being someone who wants to learn right now or not. And if they don't, it's like, it's not a big deal for me.
That's what blew my mind about this 70% on first exposure, because when I started tracking that like very loosely in my own lessons, you just start noticing that
me with
the time flies fast.
That's killing me this year. The 70%.
And I've said this before on the podcast, but like you can do this simply, like especially like I teach one-on-one, so I don't know how you're going to do this in a group class. Eric, you could figure it out and tell us. But just keep a piece of paper, and every time you ask a student to do something and they get it right, put a tick on the left, and every time they get it wrong, put a tick on the right. This is a scorecard for how well you're doing as a teacher. Because if you're not giving them the right difficulty level of tasks, I mean, that's why they're paying you to be there. Like, is to sequence things. And man, you wouldn't believe like how fast lessons go and how into lessons people get when they're actually given the appropriate level of challenge, which by the way, we usually over challenge. Like not in a playful way, but in a punishing way.
No, that's my problem. I still don't believe that slowing down is speeding up. Slowing down my teaching is speeding up the learning.
Wait, say that again. You believe slowing down is speeding up?
Yeah,
you don't
slowing down my teaching is speeding up the learning.
Yeah, you should kind of be at the point when you show... I was showing this kid how to play the C chord. C chord needs 3 fingers on a guitar. I teach it 1 finger per every week or 2, so I add fingers over time. And this lesson I did last week, I was like, okay, this is the mini C chord. And this girl who was in grade 5 was like, are you serious? That's so easy. And that's where I stop. I'm not like, let's add more, because it's enough. Because if I added more physical difficulty, it's going to leave less room for her to be able to actually use the thing in a song, Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I get all jacked up about this stuff. I love psychology. It's important. And for me, it makes the job fun, Makes it, because you can see this growth mindset stuff in your students. Like, wow, that student is not actually very good at playing music objectively, but man, like they are just like, their growth mindset. Like I have this one kid who's, I never aptitude tested him, but he's struggled with learning tonal and rhythm patterns over years, but now, he's 5 years into it and he's really, but this kid just had a real growth mindset, Eric. Like no matter what I would give him to do, like he wasn't phased. He would just keep trying. And I actually grew to admire that and prefer students with more of a growth mindset than higher aptitude, because it's more fun as a teacher. So
there's a 39-minute 39-minute episode. It was going to be 20, but that's typical. Bo, this is a good conversation. Maybe we'll revisit in the future. What do you think?
Yeah, we love to hear. We'd love to hear what people think too. I mean, if you disagree with stuff we said, tell us. I'd love to. I'm sure we ruffled some feathers with the learning styles stuff. But
that'd be cool. Yeah. Bo and I are committed to our own growth mindset, so lay it on us.
I mean, especially if there's any constructivist teachers in the audience. I mean, constructivism is a very popular educational, method. I'd love to have a constructivist teacher on the podcast and debate them about constructivism, because I think there's a lot of good points, but I think that there's a lot of, bordering dangerous philosophies.
Yeah, you and I need to disagree more.
constructivism.
We'll have some better. We'll up our audience number. I'll fight
maybe
on something.
Maybe we just need really clickbaity podcast titles, like Gordon was wrong about
Gordon
this
is
one
wrong.
thing. And don't speak ill of the dead.
All right.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Okay.